Hey everybody, welcome to Bible Time. This is a special bonus episode today because this is the coolest thing. A couple of videos ago, we went through the beginning of John chapter 5, and I was sitting in church this weekend, and Pastor Jo read a verse that I sort of quoted something like I had heard it, but it wasn't written in the Bible that I was reading. So I typically read out of the ESV. And so I have not studied this out yet. I'm doing this with you. I wanted to go through this together. So there's a missing verse in my version of the Bible. John chapter 5, verse 4 is not there, a verse that would be in other Bibles. So let's take a look at where we're at here. John chapter 5, one more time. Let's go back to it. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now, there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. Verse 3, in those lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. And then what I didn't even see is that it goes from verse 3 to verse 5. And then one of them was there who had been invalid for 38 years. So here's the section that we all read together the other day. And then I'm in church and I hear 5 verse 4 read, and it talks about an angel going down and stirring the water, which if you remember in the video that I filmed a couple studies ago, I had said, yeah, there was this, heard about it, or, I think the tradition goes, or something like that. And so here we are. My version has no verse 4. I think the New King James has it. And so what I'd like to do right now is go and study this out. I have not studied this out yet. Now I do know this. I do know that certain versions have verses missing in other places that some versions keep. And generally speaking, I believe the reason for that is that if a group of translators gets to a place where they don't believe that a verse or an addition or an end of a verse or a section was actually included in the original writings, then they would disclude it from our modern translation. Some people critique, the Bible of, oh, it's all been changed and all that. The truth is, it's actually very accurate to the original, but an older translation might have had something that, say the oldest manuscript that they had was, from the year 500, and so the Bible then is translated word for word based off that manuscript. But then if we find a manuscript that's from the year 400 and it's missing a verse, then that between 400 and 500 somebody maybe made that addition. And so that only happens in a very few places in the scripture. Generally speaking, we can trust the integrity of the entirety of the scriptures, but that does happen in a few places, and there's debate on just a few small sections as to, And so what I want to do now is I'm just going to go about studying this. If you have time, maybe you just pause this and go study it out yourself. I'll report back with what I find, but this is exactly the sort of thing that I'm trying to express to all of you that are watching, is that even as a pastor, we don't know everything all the time. There's no way that we can know and have memorized every detail about the scripture and theology, but this is what studying the scriptures and spending time with God is all about, is going in and digging for the gold that's within the scriptures, digging for the gold in prayer that's within God's heart, and seeking after him. And so I'm going to go ahead and go for that right now, and I'll report back to you. Okay, I'm back. Here we are right in the midst of the case of the missing verse, John chapter 5. And it is 5 verse 4 that's not there. And so, hey, let me just show you a little bit of what I did. This is not, I would say theologically in depth or anything like that. It's just simply what I did. And I kind of wanted to go about it in a simple way, because I wanted to see how, what it's like to not have, say, Logos Bible software or anything like that. But what can we find on Google? How can we discern whether the information is credible or not? And so that's exactly where I started. I started at Google, and it led me to a page from Faith Life, who I happen to know is the organization that puts out Logos Bible software, which is most definitely acclaimed and high end, although it's really expensive. So there's many free aspects of study online that are totally, for the most part, going to get you what you need, at least in terms of personal study and all those things. So I started at Google. I found a study from Faith Life, from Bible Study Magazine, that points out the fact that there's a few versions that do not include the verse. In fact, most versions do not include the verse. These are the versions that do include the verse, 5:4. That would be the King James, the Darby, the World's English, the Young's. Those are the ones that actually include it. And then the NASB and the NCV include the verse in brackets. And then most other verses disclude the verse with typically a little asterisk or a little, something that has a note as to why it was discluded. And most of those notes say something to the effect of, some versions include all or some of verse 5, verse 4, but due to the fact that older manuscripts were found, we've discluded it. And so people that study the original manuscripts, Hebrew and Greek and Aramaic, they would be called textual critics. Obviously Bible scholars, Hebrew scholars, Greek scholars, but the ones that specifically study the texts and are critical of the translation process, they have studied this, and what took place is, just like, for example, the King James Version of the Bible was translated in 1611 by the textual group of original scriptures that they had at the time was called the Textus Receptus, and the King James Version, translated way back in the 17th century, was translated primarily from that group of original documents. So by the time the 1800s came around, they had discovered newer yet older physical copies of the scripture. That new in the sense that it was a new discovery, them finding the documents, but as they analyzed the documents, they realized that they were older in their origination. And so this is where we find ourselves, is that most translations that are based on the most up-to-date scholarship and knowledge of the original text is going to disclude the verse. And so what does that mean? Maybe all that wasn't necessarily interesting to you, but to me the question is, why is it being discluded? And the two options would be somebody didn't like the content, or, like we just discussed, it was a dating issue. And so, just to clarify, it is clear and apparent that no translator is removing a verse from the Bible simply because they didn't like the content. Somewhere along the line, Martin Luther said, I think that James should be thrown out of the Bible because James says, without works, faith is dead. And Martin Luther, the great reformer, was bringing about this rebirthing knowledge that it's only through faith, sola fide, that we are saved. And so his whole Reformation was based around the fact that we we believe in Jesus and we have faith in him, and it's not based on works. And in his case, he was fed up with all of the works and the legalism that was taking place in the Catholic Church at the time. And so, but yeah, anyway, somewhere along the line, Martin Luther said, I think that James shouldn't even be in the Bible, but we can't do that because James was in the original canon, and we believe that was a letter written at the time, sourced from the earliest followers of Jesus. And so we're not just going to throw it out. And in this case, 5 verse 4, nobody's just going to throw it out because, say, they didn't believe in angels, or they didn't believe that an angel would go down and stir the water, or that their belief of the interpretation of an angel stirring the water was just folklore. They wouldn't remove it for those reasons. Now, those might be real reasons, in the sense that, in my opinion, we can't know, was it just folklore at the time, this sort of belief? Where did the belief stem from, that these people sitting around the water, that there was something that was going to stir the water, and then the first person to jump in the pool was going to be made well? I don't know. Was that an angel sent from the true God? And was there actually an angel that would do that? It's possible. Was it just merely secular folklore, and that's what the people at the time believed, but it wasn't actually sent from the God Yahweh? I don't know. But the point is this: when we read the scriptures, at the very least, we can know it wasn't removed because somebody along the line just didn't believe it, or they thought it was folklore. They wouldn't remove it for that reason. If the original writer included it, they would include it. But the earliest manuscripts say that it wasn't in there, and show that it was added later, and so they discluded it. So in this case, the reason would be dating, not content. It would not be removed for content's sake. So where does that leave us? That leaves us with the fact that we don't believe that verse was in the earliest scripture, whether or not God healed people specifically that way, or that was just something that they believed. It matters in a sense, but I guess for our purposes and what it means to our life today, it's not there for us. And so we could say it doesn't necessarily matter, because what matters all the time as we study the scripture, what matters here today, is the fact that Jesus showed up. And whether or not there was an angel in a pool and that was something that truly happened or not, Jesus shows up, and he had the power to immediately heal instead of waiting for some random point in time and then beating somebody else to the water. Jesus shows up and brings the healing. And so that's what I learned today. I hope that helps you. I don't know if you noticed that at all, but I missed it, and that's kind of part of the process. Is we're reading together, we're learning, and sometimes we miss things, and sometimes we get it. And so, hey, on one last note, I've begun getting messages back from people just responding to how the reading has been going and responding to some thoughts that they've had. And so I wanted to say thank you for that. Anybody that ever has any thoughts, shoot me a message, shoot me a DM, or add a comment, whatever it is. I'd love to hear from you. Love to hear, I think the community would love to hear any additions or any thoughts that you guys have. And you know what? Sometimes I need to be corrected. And so it's okay if somebody says, hey, I think you maybe got this wrong. And then we study it out together, and we both, we all learn together and grow, just like we did today. So anyway, thanks for joining me. Hope this bonus content on the case of the missing verse helped.